Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phill and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows it.
What facts? What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cameron, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Did you know that this is episode number 20? We've made it that far.
I did. I was thinking about that earlier today. It's hard to believe we are on our 20th episode, and hopefully many more to come.
Well, today we've got an interesting episode, last one before the midterms, and we're going to talk about the usual, right? We've got our regular Trump saga segment that we'll lead off with. We've got a couple of international elections, so I think we're going to go down to Brazil, talk about that one, and over to Israel as well. And then it's pretty much all races. We've got a fairly decent amount of states that we're just going to go through, make a couple of predictions, and talk about where we stand right before the midterms, which are next Tuesday, the 8th.
Yeah, well, I am excited. I mean, we do have a lot of races that we are covering tonight. I mean, I feel like this is kind of our recap night. I mean, we've been talking about this for, 19 episodes now, and tonight it's kind of the culmination. Certainly looking forward to what we've got coming up this week in the midterms. But before we get started, I want to plug our social media here real quick. Certainly jump on our website, pocketpolitics.co. You can link up to our social media from there. Get on our Facebook, get on our Instagram, like our posts. Feel free to comment, share, do all of that good stuff. And you can also send us an email, CameronandPhil@gmail.com. So we've got a lot to talk about here, Phil. Why don't you give us our Trump news of the week?
Yeah, well, before I do that real quick, I do want to mention for all our listeners, next Wednesday, the day after midterms, we will be broadcasting a special midterm update episode. We may not have all the results, but we will certainly have some. So please tune in midweek for a special midterm update. Trump. So it looks like multiple sources reported this week that Trump is set to announce his candidacy for the 2024 presidential election as early as the 14th of November. So less than a week after the midterms, we could be getting some breaking news on that front. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I will just say I've been saying I think he's going to run all along. I just want to throw that out there. My thoughts are this. I think obviously he's waiting until after the midterm. Sounds like he's committed to do this. I had a feeling he was going to anyway. My thoughts are this. He's going to create some news. He can now also, by the way, say that, I'm a political candidate. Maybe he can take some heat off him from some of his various issues he's got going. I say issues, all the different, things he's, facing court time with and all that. And at the end of the day, it sounds like Republicans are ready to just get out of the way. I heard earlier today that Ron DeSantis is now saying that, all right, well, if Trump's going to go, I'm going to back out of this thing. So, I mean, is he just going to run uncontested, do you think? Or do you think somebody may try and challenge him?
It's hard for me to tell. I think this could still be a ploy. This could be a ploy to raise money for Republicans as we, enter the last couple of days. I mean, we heard this, Thursday?
Yeah, it just came out a day or two ago.
Yeah, so I think this still could be a ploy. I'm not convinced why he would want to do this because it's honestly more I've mentioned this in the past that it's more profitable for him not to do it, and just to keep taking donations that are not affiliated with a campaign. Um, so who knows if this comes to fruition? All I know is normally when something like this comes out, I give it very little attention. The problem is you saw it on CNN and posted the article to the Facebook, and then I started seeing it from other sources later that day. So it does seem like this one actually has traction. If he runs unopposed, what do you think that does to the Republican Party? I mean, what do you think that says about the party?
I think there's going to be definitely people disappointed. I say that because there seems to be, I don't know if I want to say excitement, but at least interest in other candidates, right? I mean, we've been talking about and seeing a lot on Ron DeSantis. Glenn Youngkin has been talked about, right? And there's a host of others. So I think there's energy there, and I think there's desire there for some other ones to run. I mean, the question is, does someone like Larry Hogan decide to run against him? We'll see. I mean, that could be. I mean, he's an outspoken critic of Trump. He's hinted that he may want to throw his name in the hat for president. So possibly he goes to try and challenge him. I mean, I find it hard to believe someone doesn't try and challenge him. So we'll see going forward. I mean, there's a long time between now and 2024. I mean, it looks like he's going to announce. So I mean, let's get the midterms out of the way, and we're probably going to have plenty more to talk about.
Yeah, so I will say, though, do you think this ends the moderate faction of the Republican Party as we know it? I mean, this is kind of just moving in the opposite direction, I think, that probably a lot of people would want the Republican Party to go.
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I feel like that they're still there. I mean, we'll talk about some of those candidates here a little later. They are still there. I mean, some of them got primaried out, but that faction's still there. I think while it may be a little quieter right now, and it may be a little quieter when, if Trump runs again, et cetera, it's still there, waiting to come out, give it some time. And who knows, maybe something happens and he doesn't run. He backs out of the race. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen, but no, to answer your question, I don't think it's the end.
I think if he runs and he is the Republican nominee, especially if he is the de facto one, the Republican Party as we know it is over. I mean, you've already got a ton of people that are on the never Trumper kind of train. There's been whole organizations created around that. I mean, we talk about the Lincoln Project and plenty of other things. It's just another Trump presidency would be pure chaos, right? And I don't think it helps the Republicans.
So there's where, I mean, I disagree with you in the sense that the party's completely changed. And I do think if he runs, I would look for, I keep saying him, but a guy like Hogan to throw his name out there. What about Liz Cheney? I mean, is she going to run as a Republican? I mean, she's running around endorsing Democrats right now, but I mean, she's still a conservative at heart. And she said she's going to do whatever she has to do to keep Trump out of the White House. So she may try and throw her name in the hat and bloody him up in the primary, or run as a third party. I mean,
but here's the thing: they held CPAC in Hungary, and Viktor Orban was a special guest speaker, right? That Liz Cheney is not going to win a nomination and prevent Trump from doing anything in that part of the Republican Party. She's not.
Well, again, I think we've got to wait and see on this. There's a long way to go. Like I said, I refuse to believe the Republican Party is dead. So, and like I said, I think there's a lot of candidates out there. Let's wait and see. You know what? For all we know, a guy like Glenn Youngkin would throw his name in the hat, and we'll see. And I mean, I'd be excited to see that. Just because Ron DeSantis said he's backing away doesn't mean some of these other ones are. So I think really on this one, Phil, we should just wait and see. And I mean, we're going to have plenty of news and plenty of Trump stuff to talk about here after the midterms.
All right. Well, speaking of elections, we said we were going to go international. This week we found out, actually it was last weekend, right? I think we woke up to this Sunday morning. We hear that Bolsonaro, the conservative president of Brazil, has been ousted. He was beaten on a very narrow margin by the soon-to-be president of Brazil, Lula, right, which is his nickname. Now, a couple things to take away from this. This is not something that typically happens in Brazil, being that the incumbent doesn't win, right? So this is actually the first time in modern history that an incumbent president has lost in Brazil. So it's kind of a record-breaking event. What are your thoughts, if any?
I mean, certainly newsworthy. It is interesting to see how this one came out. You mentioned that it was a tight race. It definitely was. I want to say it was only like 2 million votes separated them. I want to say, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I read something about it earlier. It sounds like Brazil has had a lot of chaos as of late, right? And so it sounds like the people wanted a change. And, they talk about, they had a lot of COVID deaths, right? I mean, they had like 700,000 COVID deaths. That was kind of dragging them down. Poverty going on. They
Yeah,
are
they have
been,
significantly high crime too.
yeah, and they were, have kind of been known as South America's largest economy, but I mean that's been all kind of beat up, and so I mean honestly, I think that people just wanted to change. Like I said, it was a very very competitive race, so we'll see how this plays out for Brazil going forward. I mean, Bolsonaro's been talking about not conceding. I don't think he has yet. I did hear though that his cabinet is all preparing the transition, so he may be kind of running around making news and headlines and getting some press time by not conceding, so to speak. But it sounds like those that work for and around him know what's going on and are prepping the transition.
Yeah, so that's kind of the same thing. I mean, so he hasn't officially conceded. There has been word from his camp, like you said, that he is preparing to transition. But there was a shaky couple of days there. I mean, there was I think it was like the day after or 2 days after he said he was going to give a speech, and then he never came out and gave the speech. But he had met with his defense secretary for like 4 or 6 hours or something like that. So who knows? But protests have erupted. The highways between Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, the two largest cities, were like completely blocked at one point. Definitely some craziness. And I said it was close. It was 51-49. So only 2 points separated it.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's not the only international election. It's also not the only one where the incumbent got beat by a former office holder in Israel. Netanyahu is back.
You say he's back. He definitely is. He's another one of those guys that just can't seem to go away. I mean, that guy's been in power off and on over the years, a whole bunch in Israel, and we are preparing to see him back in power yet again. What do you think this does for Israel and kind of the world going forward, Phil?
I don't really know. I'm certainly no expert on Middle East politics, and it's probably one of the most dynamic political regions in the world. So there's always a lot going on. So I'm not really too sure. I just get the feeling that there was some stability in the past when Netanyahu was there, maybe somewhat. I don't really know. But yeah, like I said, I'm certainly no expert. What do you think?
I mean, there are some dynamics in play here. Netanyahu and Biden aren't the best of friends. I mean, they're not true enemies either, but there has been some kind of cold relations between the two in the past. But I mean, that being said, at the end of the day, I think Israel realizes what the United States does for him, and I think Netanyahu's a savvy enough guy to work with whoever's in charge. Definitely no fan of Iran, which, I mean, I don't think it matters who's in charge in Israel. Iran's not going to be, warm and cordial with them. The only thing is, going forward with us and Iran, and I know, Biden, I think, has kind of wanted to get back in with, the nuclear arms stuff or I say nuclear arms, kind of the nuclear treaty and such with Iran and such. I mean, that is not something Netanyahu is a fan of. I mean, when Obama was negotiating that, Netanyahu was pretty upset about it. So, there is some potential dust ups there, I suppose, depending on how we go forward with our relations with Iran. But I mean, again, the guy's been there. He does provide Israel stability. I mean, they keep going back to the guy. So, I mean, again, I guess we'll see how it transpires. But I mean, I think we kind of have an idea. We've seen the guy around a lot. He is known around the world, whether you like him or not. So, yeah, I mean, we'll wait and see on it. But I think it's it's a move that, if nothing else, will give Israel some stability.
Yeah, and I don't think Israel lacks much stability for the most part. I mean, they do a lot of things really well. They've got an incredible military and defense program. Depending on how you believe about it, it may not be necessarily used for the right purposes. But they were probably one of the best countries handling the COVID-19 epidemic or a pandemic. So there definitely are some things that Israel has as far as stability already. So I mean, who knows? Like I said, I'm no expert, so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, we did have some stuff, definitely in the news from around the world. We'll wait and see in the coming weeks if we get more world news here. As of late, we've been reporting on some world politics, but I did want to talk about something though here, and that was up in Alaska, our 49th state. And they had a debate recently for their lone House seat. And I don't want to sit here and, kind of go on and on about the debate and he said this and she said that, blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to point out what I saw in this debate, in that the candidates, and let me just kind of lay that out. There's four primary people running because, again, Alaska has this ranked choice voting like we've talked about in the past. But kind of the two big names are the Democrat, who's actually the incumbent, right? She won that special election seat earlier this summer. Mary Peltola is her name. And then Sarah Palin is the big name on the Republican side. There's another Republican, Nick Begich, in there, and I think a libertarian candidate in there as well. But here's what impressed me about this. Okay, their debate, in particular, Peltola and Sarah Palin, right, standing there, they were really civil, and they actually were doing what looked like a real debate. And I wanted to bring it up because it was refreshing to see it, right? I mean, it turns out Peltola and Palin are actually friends and have been for years, and both of them had a lot of good things to say about the other one. They weren't slinging mud. They weren't throwing personal attacks at each other. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. Having watched a bunch of debates this fall and summer, for that matter, I feel like that's all we've been seeing is just pure mudslinging. I mean, we saw debates like Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance, and there was like two boxers just beating up on each other, right? And some of the other ones that we saw like down in Florida and such. So it was refreshing to see that up there. I got to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of other candidates that could learn a little something from that debate up there. Didn't get a lot of press time, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And I got to be honest with you, ladies, well done.
All right. Well, speaking of Alaska, as we get into these final races right before the midterms, that's where we're going to start. So, we have a Senate race and a House race there. I think since you just talked about the debate for the House seat, let's dig right in. The big, again, because of this ranked choice voting, you basically got three prominent candidates. You said there may be a libertarian in there too, but that candidate is certainly not getting many of the numbers, whereas Peltola, Begich, and Palin are getting numbers. What do you think this falls out as, Cam?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think Peltola, she won it earlier this year. Now, there was drama, like we've talked about in the past, kind of between, Palin, and Begich kind of going back and forth about, the voting didn't happen this way, complaining about ranked choice voting. But at the end of the day, you've got Peltola in there. She's the lone Democrat. You still got Palin and Begich in the race. I see them taking some votes from each other, even though the ranked choice voting will let them kind of stack their votes. And by the way, Palin has called for Begich to get out so she could be the lone Republican in that race. He's not going to do it. I think when the dust settles in this one, I think Peltola holds her seat.
I agree with you. And just for a note, I mean, Peltola probably easily wins this. She leads both of them by double digits in all the recent polls. Um, so much so that they kind of stopped polling, mid-October. Um,
By the way, Mary Peltola is endorsed by Republican Lisa Murkowski. I thought that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of what we see in Alaska, right? Obviously the debate even adds on to that. It is a very civil state, you know. Um so yeah, I think this is going to be one that we're probably going to know fairly late, not because it's close, but just because it is Alaska and we've talked about how elections go there. Moving on, one other big race in Alaska is the Senate race. You just mentioned Lisa Murkowski, who is the incumbent against Chewbacca, I believe is how you say it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know. I'll let you make your prediction, but I don't think there's any way Murkowski does not win this. She seems fairly popular in the state. It is because of ranked choice voting again, a Republican versus a Republican. But Murkowski, as we know, is fairly moderate, and a lot of polls have her up again, double digits over her opponent. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think Murkowski's going to hold her seat. Like you said, it is ranked choice voting. There's like 4 candidates running. There's a Democrat in there and such, but Murkowski's been, around Alaska politics for years. She's been a senator up there for years. I see her holding her seat. Yeah, at the end of it, I think Murkowski prevails. But like you said, we're not going to know anything, I think, until like the end of November because it takes them that long to get all their votes flown in and do the ranked choice stuff. So, yep, going forward, I think Murkowski's got that one. That's my prediction, Phil.
Okay, on to Florida of the West, the great state of Arizona. Yeah, and if anybody is wondering why we're calling it Florida of the West, it's just because it has been crazy lately, especially in the world of politics. We've talked about it. I think probably 10 of the 10 last episodes we've mentioned something about Arizona. It seems like.
I feel like Arizona has shown up in like every other episode we've done. I guess let's start out and dig right in here on this one with that governor race out there. Hobbs versus Lake. I mean, talk about some mudslinging. I mean, there certainly has been that there. Carrie Lake's she's all over, the television. She's going on any news agency, I think, that'll have her. She's up in the polls. She's got momentum behind her. Carrie Lake presents herself as a polarizing figure, right? I mean, people either seem to love her or hate her. I'll say this about Carrie Lake, though, and one big thing I think she has working for her is the fact that the woman was in news, right? I mean, she was a newscaster for who knows how long. She's very comfortable in front of the camera. And yeah, I think my personal opinion, Phil, I think Carrie Lake is going to win this race. What do you think?
So I'm going to disagree with you now. Right now, the polling aggregate has her up by 2.5 points. You mentioned
Yep.
it. She's really good in front of a camera because that's what she does for a living.
Yep.
For most of her life. The one thing I'll point out, we're going to talk about this in several other states too, but if you look at the latest polls, there's really only one reputable poll in the last like 2 weeks, and that is the Marist College poll, right? So there's been some discussion this week about kind of some questionable polls or some polls that kind of lean a certain direction. I don't want to get too much into that, but I will say that when I kind of did some research, there are some of these, it's a company called Insider Advantage. And when you go down and look at their polling record, it's a little bit weak. And so I think there are some weak points in here. I will tell you, of all those polls conducted, that Marist College poll that ended on November 2nd had Hobbs leading by a point. So with that being said, I think there's a chance. And the optimist in me is that Hobbs is able to pull this out. But that's certainly not the only race in the state. We've got Certainly a very dynamic Senate race there as well.
Yep.
And that is Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat, versus Blake Masters, the January 6th, denying. I mean, God, what else can you say about this guy? He's pretty far to the right.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at the polls on this one, I mean, it has tightened up a lot as of late. Um, Kelly still holding his ground. You know, the Marist College poll at the end of October, early November here has him up by as much as 4. Some of the other ones have it, well, the Insider Advantage one has it tied. KA Consulting poll has Kelly up by a point. It's really tight. I would be inclined to go with Masters just because of A, the momentum, and then B, thinking, well, if Kerry Lake wins, does he get continue on with the Republicans? In other words, if they're voting for Lake on the ticket, are they just going to go down and vote Masters? But I see Kelly still hanging in there, and he is an incumbent, and so I actually think Arizona may be a state that Democrats can hold out there with Kelly. We know it's going to be close, and I'll be honest with you, I could see Arizona taking a few days, maybe a week or more to call, this race, the governor race, and the next race we're going to talk about. I actually have a feeling, looking at polls and such, that I've got a feeling Kelly's going to hold on to this one, but barely.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that KA Consulting poll. Did you want to mention who that's sponsored by? I mean, it's literally sponsored by the Citizens United, right?
Yeah, I mean, Phil. I was just reading off some different polls I saw. I mean,
I'm just saying.
Kind
So,
of all over
like,
the place.
the Citizens United, like, fairly non-reputable poll from November 2 to 3, again, only captured about 500 it's like likely voters, not even registered or like are gonna vote. And even they had Kelly up by 1. So I think Kelly wins this one. But we can't leave the state and move on without a brief mention of the mustache cam.
Yeah, well, we had to get him in here. Secretary of State race there. I think the mustache is going to win. I mean, there's not been a lot of polling going out on this. Last one I think I saw had him up by 4 points. I think he prevails. I think he takes his big mustache and wins the thing. What do you think, Phil?
I on this one I just don't know. Again, I'm just gonna go with optimism on this one and say that somehow his opponent, the former Marine, can't think of his name right off the top of my head. But I'm just going to hope that he wins and is able to pull it out, regardless of the, ballot box monitoring that is going on, and all the other craziness down there. So I will agree to disagree with you and hopefully democracy wins in the state of Arizona.
Oh, real quick before we move away from there too, Phil, I just wanted to put a plug out there. The gentleman running against the mustache, that's Adrian Fontes.
That's right, Adrian Fontes. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Fantastic. What's next?
All right. How about Colorado? Why don't we dig into that House race out there, Phil?
Absolutely. So the House, specifically the 3rd district, has candidate Frisch versus Lauren Boebert, the incumbent. I'll just go out. There's not a ton of data because it is a House race, and it's one that's been, that the dynamic of this district has changed quite a bit since the last election. I think Frisch wins. I don't even think it's going to be that big of a contest. The little polls we do have has Frisch winning. And so I think that's what we've got to go on. And I'm just hoping that we can, hopefully Lauren Boebert has spoiled her own reputation enough that Coloradoans are gonna dump her in the 3rd district.
So I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I think Boebert's going to hold her seat. It has been reshaped or redistricted, her new district, if you will. It is a little more red than it was even in the past. It's that western slope or that western side of Colorado. I think Bobert's going to hold it. I mean, yeah, she's technically in a statistical dead heat with this Adam Frisch, but I think she holds it. I mean, it's probably going to be close, but 538's got it. I want to say 90% chance that Bobert holds her seat, and I'm going to agree with him on that one. I think she holds it. Although, like I said, I think it's going to be close, and I think Bobert's got to look at it and realize that in a state like Colorado, even though she's in a fairly red district, she's probably going to, have to keep an eye on some of the things she says, because her, dare I say, antics and such does definitely rub some people the wrong way. But yeah, I think Bobert holds her seat. So how about the Senate race there? Michael Bennet, Joe O'Dea.
Yeah, so your favorite Joe O'Dea, the moderate Republican coming in to challenge. This one has looked a lot closer in the past. This one did not quite tighten, and the aggregate still has Bennett up by about 10 points. So I'm not sure this is going to be as much of a contest as the House race that we just mentioned. Your thoughts?
Well, I've seen some, some articles as of late talking about O'Dea tightening it. I know you mentioned the polls still show him, kind of down by 10. He's getting, he's definitely getting airtime and some different networks are bringing him on. I've mentioned before, I like the fact the guy is a moderate, right? I mean, I'm kind of a fan of moderate candidates, as you guys can probably tell. And I think he brings a lot to the table. I don't want to go so far as to say O'Dea is going to win this, but I think he's going to make it close, probably much closer than any of the pundits think. And I'm going to say it. I think there's even an outside, although probably a very outside shot, that O'Dea even wins it and flips this seat.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think again we're gonna have to disagree. But yeah, I just don't see it. I mean, looking at all the data that's out there, it looks like Bennett's got a hold on this one. Again, he is an incumbent.
He is.
I joked about this guy as like the senator that you never hear about, and then like a week later after I made that joke, he's in the news and talking on TV and stuff. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I think we'll probably be able to announce this race by Wednesday when we host our special episode.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, like I said, I think Bennett does hold it, but I think at the end of the day, I think O'Dea is the kind of guy that, I think he'll concede. I don't think he's going to run all over Colorado demanding a recount or anything like that. So yeah, I think we'll know the results of that one fairly quick. But why don't we move down to Florida, Phil? There's certainly been a lot of fireworks down there.
Yeah, Florida, the dick of the country, isn't that what the fired reporter from MSNBC called it that lost her job?
Yeah, Tiffany Cross.
Yeah, but in all fairness, we've got a fairly, I would say, not so tight race for governor. DeSantis up double digits. I think he is going to continue to be the governor of Florida.
I agree. Yeah, I think he's going to win it. And I think he's going to win by a fairly big margin. The other race in Florida that we've been tracking and we've talked about on past episode or two is that Senate race down there. Marco Rubio versus Val Demings. The polls have kind of been up and down on that one. But, at the end of the day, Marco Rubio is an incumbent. He's got a lot of name recognition. I know Demings, she has name recognition also, but I got to go with Marco Rubio on this one. I think he's going to hold his seat, Phil.
I agree with you 100%. I just think that the gap is too much. I mean, Demings has been doing a good job. If she would have ran for Congress, she probably would have won. The problem is she's in a statewide race in a very red state and a very, gerrymandered state that, was almost completely redistricted recently. But even with that, if Demings wanted to go to Congress, she probably should have ran in the House. But you can't blame her for trying to unseat Marco Rubio. I just think he wins. He's got too strong of an advantage there. And unless we're in for a huge surprise, I don't think she stands a chance.
No, like I said, I think those races will be over. And I say over. I think they'll be over fairly early. And I think those will be ones we'll be talking about on Wednesday. So why don't we go just north of Florida, though, to Georgia, Phil? really hot Senate race there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got Raphael Warnock, the incumbent, only for 2 years because of the way he won in 2020 against um, Herschel Walker, the the Republican candidate, Trump endorsed Republican candidate. This one is close, so
Oh yeah, no, it is very close. I've thought a lot about this one. I'm going to be honest with you though. I look at Georgia. You've heard me say this a million times on the podcast. I'm going to say it again here now. I consider Georgia a red state. I think Warnock is vulnerable. He's putting up a fight. I mean, he's all over Georgia campaign, and I saw him on TV today. Herschel Walker's out there though as well. Um, but I think Walker's going to win this one. I think he's got momentum behind him. He's had a lot of prominent Republicans going down to Florida and stumping for the guy, or just getting on TV and stumping for him. He's had his scandals. He seems to have run through those unscathed. I think the voters are behind him. I think the Republicans are going to flip a seat down there, and I think we're going to have Senator Herschel Walker. But I don't know that we're going to have this race finalized in November, because if neither candidate gets over 50%, it's going to a runoff, and that runoff will be in early December. So we may not know the outcome of this one for a few weeks yet.
absolutely. I am going to again disagree. I think Warnock wins this. Again, this is another one where there's a ton of polls out there. The only reputable one in the last 3 weeks or so is a Marist College poll. Over 1,100 registered voters. Walker up by 4 points in that poll. And then I also think that we're going to see some change in the demographics a little bit in Georgia based on the fact that we're seeing these certainly newsworthy early voting numbers. And so I think that wins. But we've also got a couple of races that we wanted to mention just because we've talked about them before on the podcast. The Georgia governor race. Again, I will kind of go the same direction. While it is not as close as the Senate race, I think Abrams is close enough that she's within reach and could pull this one out. Again, this based on mostly optimism, but also some of the news we've seen with early voting in Georgia. The numbers are at presidential election year numbers, and I think she stands a chance to unseat Governor Kemp.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on that one. I think it's Kemp all the way. I mean, Abrams she's hung around. She's, certainly gone out. She's, stumping all over the state. I mean, she's got name recognition, but Kemp all the way. He's the incumbent. He's going to be tough to beat. People in Georgia like him. I mean, this is a guy that survived an onslaught of Donald Trump and just kept on ticking. I don't see Abrams taking him down. I think it's going to be Kemp all the way. I don't even think it's going to be that close.
Okay. And then the 14th congressional district, again, we've talked about it. I don't even think this is worth discussing too much. Marjorie Taylor Greene, what do they say, the most expensive House race in history.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that this district is going to switch. I mean, it's a very Republican district, as crazy as she is. I don't think there's a chance in hell that she loses this election. But again, we don't really have any data, and there was even an article this week that just said that there's probably not a chance in hell that Marcus Flowers wins this election.
No, it is funny that all that money's been raised for a race that is basically not even competitive. Yeah, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene all the way. That district is solid red. She's got it. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up Georgia. Phil, we got a Senate race in Indiana we've covered a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this McDermott Young race. It's very close. I would almost say this could be too close to call. And Indiana is not a state that we talk about a lot, so it's hard to kind of gauge the dynamic there. For the sake of the episode and just reaching out there and trying to grab something, I will go for the upset and say McDermott wins. I know I'm not going to win this one on Tuesday, but I'll do it for the sake that if it does happen, I can jump up and down and point at you and say I was right in this one race that we that we barely talk about.
Yeah, no
But
kidding.
with
I
that
mean,
being,
like nobody. I was gonna say, no kidding. I mean, nobody's talking about that race like nationally. You never hear anything about it. But sorry to
I
cut you off
know.
there, Phil.
So, oh, you're good. The next couple of states should be pretty quick. Iowa, does Chuck Grassley win the Senate race in Iowa?
He does, but Phil, I'm predicting this one's going to be closer than the pundits are saying. I kind of alluded to that last week when I talked about this race in my parting shot. But yeah, no, I actually think Franken's going to make it a little more competitive than many think. Grassley, though, has been in the Senate there forever. I mean, the guy is 89 and still running. I think he's been in the Senate there since like 1980, and he's going to keep his seat. But like I said,
Okay.
I think Franken makes it a little closer than what we
Okay.
think.
Yeah, I think Grassley wins. Kansas, again, another quick one. The governor's race there with Laura Kelly, we've talked about a couple of different times. She's up in the polls. I think she holds it.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I'll give her that incumbent edge there, and I'll agree with you on that one, Phil. I think she's going to hold her seat in a probably what again will be a close race.
Okay, moving on to Michigan. We've got the governor's race there. Certainly worth talking about. With all the controversy and all the things that have gone on, I think Gretchen Whitmer holds her seat. Again, she is the incumbent. Um, Her opponent has certainly made a name for herself. Um, over the past couple of months, but I just think is too controversial. I don't think. Um, she stands a chance of unseating Gretchen Whitmer.
I mean, it is. I will say this. I think this race, again, is another one that is closer than people thought it was going to be. I mean, Tudor Dixon is giving Whitmer a run for her money on this one. Just kind of looking at various polls, again, they're kind of all over the place. I'll give Whitmer, though, the incumbent edge again, and I think she's going to hold her seat. I think, she's just looking at Michigan and, knowing she's up there and I guess I consider Michigan kind of a purple state, but yeah, I think Whitmer's going to have the edge there. Close race, but yeah, I'll go with Gretchen Whitmer holding her seat, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, you say closed. It's the aggregate is outside of the margin of error, and um, Whitmer in recent polls, like I'm talking about last week recent polls. Whitmer's been up anywhere from 11 points to 4 points. I just don't
Yep.
think Tudor Dixon stands a chance.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
guess what I was getting at was I think it's a little closer than people thought. I mean, I'm seeing the aggregate like 4.8, which is, again, I think that's closer than what we thought, a few weeks ago, which is, kind of a surge under candidate. But yeah, I'm predicting Phil Whitmer holds her seat. So why don't
Awesome.
we move? Why don't we move on to Minnesota?
Okay, your home state. You want to talk about the governor race there?
Yeah, that's been a competitive race, or is a competitive race, I should say. Tim, Walz, the incumbent governor up there, he starts out, he's, ahead a fair amount in the polls. Then it's kind of tight, and then his opponent, Dr. Scott Jensen, had some kind of hiccups on abortion, and that all got kind of hot. And then Walz is up again by a pretty good margin, and Jensen seems to be making it tight now. I mean, people are talking about it being a little tighter race, but the aggregate still has Walz up by over 8 points. I'll say this: Walz is the incumbent. Minnesota is a fairly blue state. I think Walz is going to hold his seat. What do you think, Phil?
I agree with you completely. I mean, there's a poll from October that has Walls up by 20 plus points. So, um, but we've also got the second congressional district down there too. You want to talk a little bit about the Craig Kistner race?
Yeah, I think that one is going to be really close. I mean, we talked about this an episode or two back, and that this is basically a repeat of a race 2 years ago, or is a repeat of a race 2 years ago. Um, Looking at that district and knowing where it lies, kind of the south edge of the Twin Cities and kind of, outside of the Twin Cities area a bit to the south, I think that's a fairly blue district up there. I'll say this though about Minnesota races, right? So the last few election cycles, we keep hearing about Minnesota trending red, but it doesn't quite turn out that way on the election days, and I'm going to go ahead and go with Craig again on this one. I think she's going to hold her seat up there. Again, I'll give her the incumbent advantage. But it's going to be really close, just like it was 2 years ago. But yeah, I'll go with Craig on this one. What do you think, Phil?
I think this one is honestly just like you said. I think this is a very good shot of Republicans flipping a seat in the House. It's definitely within. It's not even within the margin of error. It's within 1 point.
Oh yeah,
In the polls that we do have. If anything, I would say Craig wins just as the incumbent. She has the incumbent advantage. That we've talked about. That's all I really have for this one. But another state that certainly is a swing state, certainly could be a big win or a big upset, is Nevada. And we've got a dynamic Senate race out there. What are we looking at, Kim?
So I'll tell you what I think we are going to see the Republicans flip this seat. I think Cortez Masto, I think she's vulnerable out there. I think Adam Laxalt, he's been definitely having momentum as of late. And, honestly, this has been a seat that I've been hearing about the Democrats have been nervous about for a while. I think Laxalt, he flips it to the Republicans.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I think Cortez Masto, she holds it with the incumbent advantage, but I also think there's some other dynamics here too at play. And I think, we haven't really talked about this too much. We've talked about this race several times, especially early on, because this has been kind of in the news for a long time as one of the easiest flips out there available for Republicans in the Senate. But this one also has a couple different things that set alarm bells off when I look at it. So one, it has a lot of really poor polling, especially over the last month to 2 months. There is a lot of bad polling. The other thing that I would say too is that, I just don't think that Laxalt has what it takes to win over the Hispanic core that makes up the unions in the big cities in Vegas or in Nevada, right? So you've got Vegas, you've got Reno, and they have extremely robust labor unions in those states that are basically centered around the hospitality industry. And I think that's gonna make a difference and bring Cortez Masto up. Those are probably people who don't respond to polls, who don't give interviews to the news, the local news, things like that. And so I think that they're largely being discounted and they're still going to come out and vote.
Okay, well, like I said, definitely you and I disagreeing on that race. I will transition us now to another state with a really competitive Senate race, and that's New Hampshire. And I say really competitive. It didn't look all that competitive a few weeks ago, and now it's suddenly very competitive.
This one's tightened quite a bit. There's been a lot of money that's been thrown into this one on the Republican side. On both sides, actually. But the late influx of money on the Republican side has definitely been there.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a race. I was going to say it was a race that I think the people just didn't think was competitive, and now all of a sudden it is. You mentioned the money coming in. This is the guy. This is the guy Don Bolduc too that has openly said he thinks the military, needs to have a role in governance and governing people. 100% anti-abortion. There's some other crazy things about this guy. Again, he's endorsed by Trump. But this guy is pretty crazy, the stuff that he's put out there. What's your prediction? I will tell you, looking at the dynamics in play here, Maggie Hassan's been a senator that people thought was vulnerable, back, some months back, right? And then there was the whole thing about, the Democrats threw a bunch of money into the Don Bolduc campaign to try and boost him because they thought they could easily beat him. And then, after that, Bolduc, he wins his primary, beats out, a couple other candidates, whatever. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, Democrats will probably hold this seat. But man, yeah, Bolduc has really climbed. I mean, I'm looking at the latest poll from Trafalgar, October 30th, November 1st. That's got Bolduc up by 1 point. Now there's an Emerson College one, interestingly enough, from the same time period. Now it's got less people they polled. The Trafalgar one had over 1,200. The 850 on the Emerson College one, that's got Hassan up by 4. So I mean, again, the polls are kind of
5.
all over the place. I see 4. I'm sorry, the one I'm looking at, I see 46 to 50. So I see 4
but
on that one.
There's tenths of a point that put it pretty much at 5. It's like 4.9.
Okay, all right. I didn't see all the tenths of a point. I was just looking at that. Regardless, I think this one's really tight to call. If you'd asked me this question 3 weeks ago, I'd have said, I would have said Bolduc was going to get beat by a pretty big margin. I think Hassan's going to hold her seat, but barely.
Yeah, I think this is an easy call for Hassan. I think it's definitely easier than than you do.
I'm just looking at the momentum. I mean, he's got a lot of momentum behind him, and so I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. I think it's going to be really darn close, and I'm having a hard time predicting this one.
Yeah, I see the momentum because it has shifted quite a bit over the past, basically month and a half. But I just see her holding on to it. I think this guy said some stuff that's way too crazy. It's like people in the polls may come out and say, give him a favorable rating, but I just don't think that it's going to hold up when the votes are counted. Moving on to New York, we've got a governor race there that is pretty bad. This one is actually pretty shocking. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is shocking in that Republicans are actually competitive in a governor race in New York or any statewide race up there for that matter. But I think at the end of the day, Governor Hochul's going to hold her seat. Zeldin's giving her a run for Zeldin's giving her a run for her money, but I think she's going to hold her seat. There's a lot made about this midterm, but at the end of the day, we have some really competitive states that are purplish, etc. But some of these other states, these red states and blue states, I just don't see them like fundamentally shifting all of a sudden and becoming like really red or really blue. So I think this is another one of those races that I see that people are making a lot out of it. Like, oh man, look out, it's getting really competitive. But I think when the dust settles, I think Hochul's going to win this.
I kind of agree with you. I just don't think New York is going to switch that far that fast. So I agree. Hochul wins New York. North Carolina is next. We've got a Senate race there. Jerry Beasley versus Ted Budd. Is it Ted? I believe it's Ted Budd.
This is that really quiet race that's been pretty competitive, but yet you don't hear a whole lot brought up about it.
I just don't. This is North Carolina. I know it's close in the polls. It's not quite within the margin of error, but it is definitely close. I don't think Beasley wins this.
I agree with it. I think Ted Budd's going to win it. The latest polls show him up. Maybe somewhat close, but yeah, I think that's Budd's race. I'll go with Ted Budd in that one. Why don't we move over to Ohio, where there's yet another really competitive race? Phil, what do you think about that Senate race up there?
Well, so I think the Senate race is pretty wild, actually. I mean, we've seen this go a lot of different ways over the past 2 months. We've talked about this one a lot. The debate was certainly very newsworthy. I'm going to predict the upset, and I'm going to predict that Ryan actually pulls one out in this. I think he. You've said multiple times that you think he overperforms. He is definitely down in the polls. But I think he pulls this one out. What do you think?
Well, I will say this. Emerson College just had a poll come out where they've got Vance now up by 8 points. But as you just mentioned, I've talked about him overperforming. I think this one's going to be close. I will say this. I think this might be the one they can flip. Tim Ryan's hung in there pretty well through the year, and he just doesn't seem to go away. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and predict J.D. Vance wins it, but I will say this. I think if the Democrats flip a seat, in the Senate, it's going to be that Ohio race. I think Tim Ryan's going to give him a real run for his money. And I have a feeling we will not know the results of this Ohio race maybe the election night. This one may take a little bit for some recounts.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think here's what I think about Tim Ryan in this race is I think there's a lot of Republicans in Ohio that don't want to tell their family and their friends that they're going to vote for Ryan. And so they're not advertising it. And I think it's going to be, this one's going to get flipped and people aren't going to see it coming. But like you said, I mean, Tim Ryan just does such a good job with limited resources. He just goes out there and talks. He was on Fox News. I mean, they did like an event with him. Fox News did this last week. And he shut down, like the crowd initially, like kind of was jeering him about when he started talking about January 6th. And he turned it around just by talking to him. I mean, the guy does an incredible job. He's out there. Like I said, I think you're going to see a bunch of people that don't want to admit, whether it be to a pollster or in a news interview or at the dinner table, that they're going to vote for Tim Ryan, but they are.
Well,
that being said,
that's interesting. Yeah, no, interesting thoughts there, Phil. Yeah.
Yeah, so with that being said, we've got a couple other races. The governor's race I don't think is competitive at all. I think DeWine holds that. Ohio is just a very red state. But we've also got the 9th district in the House, one of our other favorites in the country, this guy, J.R. Majewski. What are your thoughts over there?
I mean, he's had a lot of drama come up about him. This was a redistricted district, if you will, that was looking like it was going to be favorably for Republicans. Probably would have been. Majewski's proven to be a rough around the edges candidate, and I'm being pretty nice by saying that, or being pretty mild putting it that way. I think his competitor, Marcy Kaptur, I think she's going to win this one.
Yeah, I think she is too. I mean, isn't J.R. Majewski, we kind of talked about him before, but he is basically the visual definition of a gravy seal, I just don't think he stands a chance. I mean, the guy had like mowed and spray painted a Trump banner in his front lawn. I mean, it's just too crazy out there. Now, with that being said, we do have, again, some pretty notable races in Pennsylvania. We've got the governor race there. We've got the Senate race there. Governor race, it looks like Josh Shapiro is in it to win it. And I think that's what we're going to see in that specific race. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I think Shapiro is going to win. I mean, he's been consistently holding, I think, around a 10-point lead in the polls. I think he's even increased that as of late.
He's got a double-digit lead in the polls. I mean,
yeah, and he's kind of been that way ever since Mastriano run his primary. It's interesting, some of the more harder right candidates that we saw win primaries this year kind of shifted and tried to moderate themselves some, and honestly, that's worked, as we often see, right? And candidates run far to either the left or right in primaries and then moderate once they get into the actual election, but. Mastriano is one who did not. He didn't budge on any of his views, and it doesn't look like that's helped him. So I am going to give or predict this race for Shapiro. And honestly, I don't even think this governor race is going to be all that close there.
So I think it's going to be closer than the polls predict, right? But I think that with going into the midterms, I mean, we have basically, 3 more days left. I think Shapiro holds this one. Again, Pennsylvania is another state where they've had extremely high early and absentee ballot counts. So I think that pushes this over. And I think that affects the Senate race too. I'm going to tell you, I think Fetterman beats Dr. Oz. I think it's going to be I think it's going to be somewhat close. Again, hopefully we'll know by the time we start recording on Wednesday. Excuse me. But with Pennsylvania's election, they cannot count any of those ballots until after any of the absentee or mail-in ballots until after the polls close on Tuesday. So who knows? I think that one is going to be close enough that it may be Thursday, Friday, even the weekend before we find out what happens. But I think Fetterman wins it. He's ran an incredible campaign. He slipped a little bit, and Oz gained some momentum. But again, there's a lot of crazy, questionable polling that has Odd in the lead by 2 to 3 digits inside the margin of error. Marist College closed a poll on the 2nd of November that had Fetterman up by 6. I just think this one, this one is going to go to Fetterman.
Yeah, well, I'm going to disagree with you on this one, and I'm not going to hesitate on this. Oz is going to win this one, I think. Polling is, you mentioned there's been a lot of polls out there that kind of been all over the place, but again, I think momentum's there for him. I heard a news clip here this past week that said, there was some concern amongst independent voters whether Fetterman's health would, allow him to do this job. I think the debate, certainly made some independents nervous, and that's what it's going to take to win this race is to bring the independents over to you. Oz is polished. I mean, we know that. He's been a TV personality for years. I think he's got this race. I think it's going to be close, but I think the Republicans are going to hold this seat up there, Pat Toomey's seat. Which is, currently the Republican. I think the Republicans are going to hold it. Yeah, it'll be close, but Oz has got this one. He's come from a long way down. You say Fetterman's run a great campaign. I disagree with you a little bit. I think he spent a lot of time trolling and such, but he's got a lot of issues that he just really hasn't addressed. Some of his, issues on fracking and some of these other things that in a state like Pennsylvania, it's going to matter. Voters are going to turn out, and they're going to turn out for Oz. I predict Oz in this one. So, yeah. That's my thoughts. So, but again, Pennsylvania is probably that and Georgia are probably the two closest watch states right now. So, look for some fireworks there, here as we go into the midterms. But why don't we look at Rhode Island really quick, Phil? They've got a House race. We've talked a little bit about that Rhode Island second with Seth Magaziner and Alan Fung. I'll just go ahead and throw my prediction out. Rhode Island's a blue state, and yes, Fung has made some noise. He's some polls have showed him ahead, but I just don't see Rhode Island changing dramatically and suddenly getting this red streak in there. So I think Seth Magaziner is going to win this one, albeit though I think it's going to be close. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Magaziner wins again. I just think Rhode Island is going to be pretty tough to flip that dramatically. But we will see. Now another big race, got a lot of media attention, a lot of national attention is the, Beto O'Rourke, Greg Abbott race in Texas. I came today with my Beto shirt on, to record. What do you think happens?
Abbott wins it. I
Okay.
mean, I just do. I mean, I've been predicting him all along. I think Texas is, it's a red state, and I know, it's trended a little more blue in the last few years and et cetera. But I think at the end of the day, I think, Texans are not going to get behind Beto O'Rourke. I mean, his gun confiscation things and some of the things he's brought up, I think that's not going to appeal statewide to Texas. Abbott's been ahead in this race the whole time as far as, the polls are concerned. And I think Greg Abbott's got this one.
Yeah, so again,
I don't even think it's going to be that close.
Yeah, so I'm going to go the other way on this one. I'm going to disagree. I think O'Rourke pulls an upset here. And again, I'm not going to be salty if I'm wrong in this one because I know it is a long shot. I mean, polling pretty much pulled out 2 weeks ago from this. And the polls all along have been heavily in Abbott's favor. The one thing I will say is that, again, we've got a lot of youth vote. I think we've got a lot of people sitting at the dinner table that don't want to tell their Republican family members and Republican friends that they're ready for a change. But I think people in Texas, right, the demographics have changed a lot over the past 2 to even 6 years. So, as businesses kind of come in and people move from different states. And I think that's going to have an effect. And I don't think we're seeing it in the polls. Again, I'm going to call it for O'Rourke, but I'm not going to be upset if I lose this one because I know it is a long shot. On to Utah. Talk about long shots that made a lot of news. Um, we've got the race for the Senate in Utah, and one that we talked about fairly recently. What do you think here? I mean, we thought that McMullen, or as McMuffin, right, as some like to call him, stood a
It's true.
chance. It's
I was,
looking like it's not that good of a chance anymore, right?
yeah, I was just laughing there about the McMuffin comment. That's Trump's name for him, so or his nickname, I should say. I mean, polls have been kind of up and down on this one. There's that Emerson College poll though that came out at the end of October that's got Lee up by 10. Um, there's a couple other polls that are reading differently, but Mike Lee for the most part seems to be up. And the aggregates got him up by almost 10, just under 10 points. Evan McMullen has run, I think, a good campaign. I think he's a really good debater. I think he carries himself well, speaks well. I don't think he wins this race. I mean, I think Mike Lee's going to win it. He's the incumbent, and he appears to have, the polls and the momentum behind him. But I'll say this: I don't think it's the last we hear from Evan McMullen, and I don't know how or what way we see him in politics again. But I think he's going to be back. But for this race, I'm going to give it to Mike Lee.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna agree with you 100% on this one. I don't think we're done with seeing McMullen, but I think Lee is gonna win this race. Keep in mind, it's Utah. It's just a state that's very Republican. Did Mitt Romney ever end up endorsing anybody, or did he end up staying out of it? As
Yeah,
far
I
as
don't
we
think
know, I know.
I was going to say, Phil, I don't think he's endorsed anyone yet. I know Mike Lee was pretty much on TV begging him to endorse him, but as far as I know, Mitt Romney has stayed out of it.
Okay, well, the next is Washington and then Wisconsin, and then we're done. Washington, we have a Senate race that, if nothing else, while it may not be all that competitive, certainly is making a lot of noise up here just because there are advertisements constantly. If you watch any of the local affiliate channels, NBC, ABC, CBS, and Fox, for any time at any point of the day, you are guaranteed to see probably at least 3 to 4 Patty Murray / Tiffany Smiley commercials. I think Washington is, again, we're the center of the kind of Tri-City area is just so Democratic. It's going to hold the rest of that and carry the state with that. And I think Patty Murray holds on to her seat.
Yeah, I agree. I think this race kind of reminds me of that New York governor race where people are kind of excited seeing somebody all of a sudden get competitive, and it's like, oh, hey, there might be an upset here, and people get even more excited. But I think when this one's all said and done, I think Patty Murray wins it. I don't think she's in a whole lot of danger of losing her seat. She's been in politics for a long time in Washington State. I mean, Smiley's making some noise, but no, I think Patty Murray's got this one. I'll go ahead and pick her for that race.
All right, and then on to Wisconsin. We've got a couple races there. Biggest is probably closest is probably the governor's race. We've got Michaels with a .8 lead on the aggregate. This one also has a third candidate in it, but that third candidate is just, what little ground they did have when they started has completely sunk out. And now it's Michaels versus Evers. Evers being the Democratic incumbent. What do you think?
I mean, that's what I think. This is another one that's, like you said, Phil, really, really close. The latest poll I see out is a Trafalgar poll that's actually got Michaels up by, looks like 2 on Evers. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick Michaels. I guess I'll say a bit of an upset because Evers is the incumbent there. But, I know there's been some kind of disgruntled people in Wisconsin speaking out against their current governor. I say people, it seems like there's quite a bit of news coming out of there about, folks not being, totally happy with Tony Evers. So, what is a really close poll and could certainly go either way. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and pick Michaels in this one.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna disagree. I'm gonna go with the incumbent solely for the fact that he is the incumbent. He's got that little bit of push there, and also um, again, I think this is people just don't want craziness. I mean, Evers was all over the news this week for basically saying if I'm elected governor, Republicans will never lose another race in the state. I
You
think
mean
that's going to turn
Michaels?
some. Sorry, Michael said that. Yep. I think that's going to turn off some people, and we're not going to get a snapshot of that before they actually go there and drop their ballot in the box.
You could be right, Phil. Like I said, this is really close one. I'm kind of just flipping a coin on it. So,
Yeah, but again, I think this is going to be one that we may not be able to talk about on Wednesday. So we'll
yeah.
see. Moving on, we've got the Senate race there. This one also made quite a bit of news. We've got the Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes um, up against the incumbent, the black horse, literally and figuratively speaking, candidate Ron Johnson. I mean, we could talk about this race for days. Johnson's actually ahead in the polls, which is like a first for him,
Yeah.
because usually he comes out of nowhere and wins.
Yep.
But he's up by a couple. The last couple polls have him up by 2 to 3 points over Mandela Barnes. Again, I don't think this is going to be one we're going to be able to talk about. I think it's going to be pretty close. I mean, like I said, polls have it within the margin of error, and I think that's what we're going to see this week.
So I'll say Johnson tends to overperform, as you just mentioned. I mean, he almost never is ahead in any poll, and yet he wins races. So I think he overperforms. I think he's going to win, and I think he's going to win by a little bigger margin than some are thinking. And so,
Okay.
yeah, I think Wisconsin is a fairly purple state, but I think Mandela Barnes may be a little too progressive for some of the general voters in that state, and so I'm going to go ahead with Johnson, the incumbent, keeping his seat in this one. So I think that wraps up our races, Phil.
Yeah, that is pretty much it. Um, So, with that being said, please, like I said, check us out. Tune in this week. We will have a midweek episode up to discuss the results or what we have of the results of the midterm elections. We're going to be recording that on Wednesday. And then, again, reach out to us on our social medias. You can link to all of them on our website, pocketpolitics.co. But what do you have for the last pre-midterm parting shot, Cam?
Well, actually, for this one, I'm gonna just put a little plug in. Well, I don't even know if it's a plug. I want to talk about a couple interviews, but Chris Cuomo's got a new show out there on News Nation, and I've actually watched a little bit of it. And specifically, a few nights ago, he had Brad Raffensperger and Andrew Yang on, and both of them gave some really good interviews. It was interesting. I mean, Raffensperger was talking about the elections in Georgia and how he's kind of traveled the state and, worked to try and convince the people of Georgia that the elections have been free and fair, et cetera. And then Andrew Yang was, certainly talking about this forward party that he's working on with some others and gave a really good interview. So, I certainly haven't watched that many episodes of Chris Cuomo's show, but I will say that, I kind of browsed on to see who he has been having on for interviews, and he seems to be having quite a few powerhouse figures on there for interviews. And like I said, his interviews with Raffensperger and Andrew Yang were really good the other night. So that's my
Awesome.
parting shot. Phil, what do you got?
Well, it's the holiday season has started. The leaves are falling. We are past Halloween and a couple weeks away from Thanksgiving, and you know what that means. It's time for pumpkin spice lattes and Steve Kornacki.
Very
So
nice.
hopefully, Steve Kornacki in his khaki shorts and white, short sleeve shirt will be out. He's already kind of had this limited series that's gone on. I've watched a couple episodes of, really good over the past couple of weeks, but he will be out. So I'm sure if you tune into your local NBC affiliate on election night, he will be there in front of the big board talking about what's going on as the votes roll in. I know I will be watching Steve Kornacki on election night. How about you, Cam?
Oh, I will be too. I'm a Kornacki fan, and honestly, I can't wait to see him on Tuesday, and I'm sure we'll be seeing him Wednesday as well with how tight some of these races are. So yeah, definitely. That's definitely a good parting shot tonight, Phil. So
yeah, if there's anything to look forward to November elections, Steve Kornacki is definitely up there. But with that being said, that's all we have for this week. Again, just another plug. Reach out to us, send us an email, connect with us on social media. Give us some stuff to talk about. We'll bring it out. We like those suggestions. But that's all we have for this week. I'll talk to you later, Cam.
All right, until next time.
Bye.